In a recent interview on SABC TV with Elijah Mahlanga, spokesperson for the DBE, on 29 September 2019, it was evident that there is much confusion about home education and cottage schools, or homeschools as some refer to them. To help us understand the difference and why it is important to keep the two separate, I've invited Hayley Gibbons to the lounge. Hayley has home educated her two sons for 12 years and is Vice Chairperson of the Eastern Cape Home Education Association. She is passionate about home education and strives to inform and educate not only those starting out on their home education journey, but also the public at large. Hayley, welcome. Please tell us, what is home education?
Hi, Anelle. Thank you for this opportunity. Home education essentially is something which happens between parent and child. It is the education which a parent provides to his own child in the child's own home. That is the normative definition of home education. The South African Schools Act, which is the law governing all education in South Africa, says that a parent may apply for his child to receive education at the child's home. It doesn't make any statements or allowance for a parent to apply for a child to be tutored outside of his home. Tutoring outside of the child's home would be regarded as private education, which is governed by its own set of laws, unless that tutoring is in the form of extra lessons being offered as supplementary to what the parent is already doing as the primary educator. A tutor can also come into the home to provide tutoring in specific areas of difficulty in the curriculum, but the parent as primary educator of his child may not be replaced in his role by anyone else.
What is a cottage school, or as some would refer to it, a homeschool?
A so-called homeschool, which doesn't consist of a parent and his child in the child's home, is anathema. That is, there is no such thing. It has no recognition in law. The South African education system only makes provision for three types of education, and that is public schools, private registered schools, and home education according to the SASSA definition. A cottage school is a small school which is often run from someone's home, hence the misleading name homeschool. It consists of a mom who is the teacher and is often educating her own child at the institution plus a few other children. It's often fewer than 20 children, but it can be more. And because these children are not being educated in their own homes, this can't be called homeschooling according to the law. It falls into the category of private schooling, and most of these cottage schools are illegal as they are not registered with their provincial education departments. Some of them have had serious challenges in trying to get registered because provincial education officials are either incompetent or they just drag their feet. And, you know, those institutions deserve our sympathy because they really are trying to comply with the law. So echsa, for example, in a recent meeting that we had with the Eastern Cape MEC for Education, raised that issue on behalf of independent schools, that the department should review their processes for registering small schools as they are taking far too long. But then, of course, there are many more who do not intend to apply for registration because they know that they will just not meet the requirements when it comes to curriculum, qualified teachers, number of learners, etc., etc.
Hayley, why is there confusion between home education and cottage schools?
The confusion has arisen because of the fact that these small schools are being run from people's homes. The public is uninformed, and because the schools are run from people's homes, the public has taken to calling them home schools. And quite frankly, it's not like there has been enough of a campaign from our side as true home educators to correct the misconception. Many cottage schoolers feel safer connecting themselves to the legitimate homeschooling cause. Home educators, whether or not they are registered with their provincial education departments, still have far greater legal recourse than those who are running or causing their children to attend unregistered schools. People seem to think that there is some kind of safety in numbers. So cottage schoolers cling to home educators because of their legal status, and nervous home educators support the cause of cottage schoolers because there are so many of them. But unfortunately, I don't think that that strategy is going to work.
Why is it important to keep the lines of distinction clear?
Well, I think those who saw the interview which you referred to on the show Agenda with the DBE spokesperson, Elijah Mhlanga, in which it was clear that he was responding to a previous interview with people who were promoting home education and cottage schooling together, will understand exactly why it's important not only to distinguish between these two completely different and separate forms of education, but also to protect the interests of home educators by not associating them with what is illegal and with what draws an immediate negative response from the government. As Vice Chairperson of echsa, I can say in this regard that in order to offer protection to home educators, we have taken exactly the stance. We believe it is not in the interests of home educators that they be associated with or represented together with cottage schools. It's not personal. We support cottage schoolers forming their own separate organizations in which they will actually be better represented because their specific interests can be focused upon. But home educators should not be forced through emotional blackmail to be inclusive of cottage schoolers. I heard recently of a comment that was made on social media that homeschoolers must sink or swim with cottage schoolers. And I think that is a highly dangerous statement and attitude. Home educators will not allow our legal status to be torn down by the activities of a different community. All around the world at the moment, home education is under threat. The Swiss Constitutional Court just concluded, as many will know, that parents do not have a constitutional right to home education. And as we speak, the Kenyan Constitutional Court is considering the legality of home education there. In South Africa, our own Court just passed a law concerning what parents may or may not do with their own children in their own homes. This last incident is particularly pertinent to the position of South African homeschoolers, and we are acutely aware of it. We don't want to be seen as arrogant towards the law, as ignorant of it, or as flagrantly uncooperative. echsa has obtained much legal advice over the last 2 years, and a constitutional law expert has gone so far as to tell us that home educators are highly unlikely to win even the registration battle, let alone anything else. So in other words, challenging the department's requirement to register your child for home education constitutionally is likely to fail. So we believe in being realistic while continuing to fight for the right to home educate. And we believe the cottage school cause of having the right to open a school of any number of learners using any curriculum with no required assessments, or no government oversight whatsoever will just not be won in court. It's unrealistic. And we also think that South African alternative educators should be cautioned against automatically assuming that things will turn out for us the way they have for the US public. We often look to the United States for inspiration, and while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, the fact is that their laws with regard to parents and children's rights function differently to ours. For one, the US government has not ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And why? Because that document is loaded in favor of children's rights. And the US government's approach to these issues is still tipped in the direction of parents' rights. And that makes laws about government intrusion into parenting easier to stop on that side of the Atlantic. And South Africans should remember that we live in the third world. We live in a welfare state in a country that has ratified that convention, and the situation in America is just not going to be duplicated here.
Those are some sobering thoughts. I have another question. Now, let's say my domestic worker has a child of school-going age. May I home educate her child along with mine at my home?
Well, that is a lovely idea, but unfortunately, no. Your domestic worker's child would not be receiving education in his or her own home. And so, according to the South African Schools Act, that is not home education. Also, the parent is not the one responsible for the majority of the education provision in that example, which is another reason why it would not be considered home education.
Hayley, if a parent would like to know more about home education, where could they find the information?
I always recommend that a prospective homeschooler should get in contact with his local homeschool community. Social media is a wonderful place to find homeschooling information, but face-to-face information gathering is always better, especially for newbies, in my opinion. There are some thriving home education associations in the country at the moment, in the Western Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, and in the Eastern Cape, which will ably assist newcomers to slot into support groups and help them to find extramural activities for their children, etc. In the Eastern Cape, echsa can be contacted at echsa, which is echsa.el@gmail.com. And we also have a website, which is full of information on home education at www.echsa.net.
Hayley, thank you very much for the information and for your time. I appreciate you talking to us.
Thank you so much.